Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. There's a good chance that at one point or another, you've either been told you need to practice some form of self-care, or you actively sought out some form of care to help maintain your life, your health, and your overall well-being. The biggest issue is sometimes what we choose doesn't actually help. The truth is, many of us think we know what self-care is and why we need it, but let's face it, fake self-care will not solve your problems. It will not help you find balance, and it will not serve you in the long run. So today, you and I are taking a one-on-one deep dive into true self-care, when and how it's most beneficial, and I'm going to hand over 7 forms of self-care that you may need to prioritize to get to a space of overall well-being. So let's dive right in. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. Unless you have been shut out from the world or living under a rock, I know you've heard the term self-care more times than you can actually count. It's literally everywhere. But what mainstream advertising and social media has done has really turned it into this space that doesn't actually serve us in any way. Self-care on the whole has become this, we'll call it a push, for Botox and skincare and spa days and unsettling realities that really equates pampering ourselves with spending time with and on ourselves. It's a lie. And it's why so many people are pushing against self-care and saying it simply doesn't work. And when we put fake self-care in place of healthy, grounded habits that are really intended to meet ourselves and to really elevate our 5 areas, our 5 key masters of our lives, it doesn't work. You've probably heard me talk about those 5 areas before, but if you're new around here, hey, welcome. But let me give you those areas just so that we all have the same framework. So emotional, the emotional center, the emotional part of your life, the mental part of your life, physical, spiritual, and financial. Now, these are not in a set order, okay? So when we're moving through experiences, while it's completely possible and it does happen, it's not likely that you're going to move through all 5 areas at once. We do when, say, there's a massive life-shaking moment and we see an impact on every level. We saw that with COVID. We see it when there's a death. We see it when there's a major shift of some sort. But again, in our day-to-day, we don't necessarily always see all 5 areas impacted at once. So those areas move around in order of importance and really depending on what you're focusing on, what's happening around you, and even your stress levels. So knowing that everything we do hits those 5 areas, again, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and financial, let's talk about real self-care, what it is, and its purpose. So important. And as always, we need a definition, right? Self-care is defined as the ability of an individual to promote and maintain health, to prevent disease, and that can be any kind of disease, emotional, mental, physical, right? Even spiritual, financial, and to cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. At its core, self-care is the practice, hold on to that word, practice, of activities that you initiate and perform to help maintain your overall well-being in those 5 areas of your life, those masters. That sounds so easy, right? It turns out it's not, because we're all in many ways getting it wrong. In fact, most people feel more burned out right now, more stressed than ever because of our economy, the world events, our relationships, our busyness. There's so many things that get in our way and that we allow to take over in our lives. And we tend to believe that if we put in the effort to, say, take a bath or to get a massage or to try to eat better, but without any true intentionality behind it, that it will solve our problems. We'll start feeling better. And yet it doesn't solve anything. And as I said in the beginning, self-care is never going to solve a problem if it's not done properly. But why? Why wouldn't a pause in, say, taking a bath help create a bit of safety net for you? This is where most people cannot make the leap that self-care actually works. If I'm pausing, why don't I feel better? The reason why is not all self-care is one size fits all. Again, we have advertising and social media telling us this is what self-care looks like. But if it doesn't fulfill you, it doesn't work. If they aren't natural habits or spaces of interest for us, we sort of feel like we're forcing ourselves into downtime while we hope that we make ourselves feel better. But we aren't addressing why we need to go to that place in the first place. In many ways, these types of self-care are used as an escape from our reality. And guess what? An escape doesn't last forever. We have to return back to our norm at some point, and when we do, we're right back to where we left ourselves, perhaps with less money or more stress and more frustration. When we talk about real self-care, I want you to start thinking about it as an adaptive, individual approach that helps you meet your needs and fill your cup. Because self-care should not, under any circumstance, contribute to your stress. There was this woman that I was working with, and she'd come into session week after week upset about where she was financially. It was really controlling her emotions, and it was controlling her mentally too. After a few weeks of these continued complaints, I asked her to track her expenses, literally down to the penny. I then had her share with me what she was spending on, not necessarily the dollar amount, but really what it was that she was doing that was causing the stress to begin with. After we broke everything down, we realized that she was spending hundreds of dollars every single weekend on her definition of self-care. So it was like getting her nails done or her hair done pretty frequently, massages. She was doing cryotherapy and facials. She was spending at such a great level that she was running through her discretionary income by the middle of the month and therefore living on her credit card. So she was pushing herself deeper and deeper into debt. She qualified everything as self-care, but when I asked her if it was making her feel better, of course the answer was no. She was more stressed. Of course she didn't feel good. She was really in a space that she was spiraling, but she didn't know how to get out of it because she thought by her definition what she was doing was actually helping herself. And I want you to realize this, that adding more things onto your plate and calling it care or calling it doing the work or taking care of yourself does not solve a problem. You actually have to have true rooted behaviors, practices. This only reinforces the idea that self-care doesn't work when we're doing the things that work against us. And it really presents a fantastic opportunity for that inner critical voice to take over, which of course we all know kills our self-esteem. This is literally the opposite of caring for the self, right? The truth of the matter is sometimes self-care is more about doing nothing or doing less than doing anything at all. We're going to talk more about this, but I want you to know that the first step to smart, honest, grounded self-care is having an open and honest conversation with yourself. Getting real about your needs, what's working, what's not, what's getting in the way, what needs to be changed, what are you investing your time and energy into? We have to be willing to lean in and hear ourselves and then do something about what we hear. And doing something doesn't always mean doing anything at all. Like I just said, sometimes that's really confusing to people. Sometimes not doing something and practicing self-care means saying no. Sometimes it's taking something off of your plate. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's just saying, you know what, I need space and time, and therefore allowing it. That is self-care. Think about how much you can accomplish by simply saying no to something you don't want to do. Aren't those 5 areas of your life impacted if you're saying yes to things that don't work for you? Of course they are. Saying no means that you can accomplish so much because you have less stress. That is self-care. Remember our definition of self-care: the practice of activities that you initiate and perform to help maintain your overall well-being in those master areas of your life. That should also bring you to the understanding that self-care isn't necessarily a one-off action. It is a practice. There is that word again. The key word to all of this is practice, which means multiple steps or repetition. Once you know what you need and you set a plan in place, you have to be willing to put those practices into action with priority. I'm going to say that again. Once you know what you need, set a plan in place, you have to be willing to put those practices into action with priority. Life is always going to do its best to make you rearrange. But if you want to refuel your spirit must be engaged. Ooh, I like that. Let me say it again, okay? If you want to refuel your spirit must be engaged. All of this is to say, the reason your past self-care hasn't worked to the long-term fullest benefit is because it wasn't set up properly. It wasn't made to refuel and replenish. It's done because you need a break, because you're burnt out or you're nearing it. It's because it's a forced time out before things get too bad to rescue yourself. And that's fair, right? That's fair. It's okay. But the truth is, the best form of self-care works when it's preventative, when you're ahead of yourself. When you are in a space that you are ahead of yourself, you are able to remain grounded. You always have the power to come back to center, but when we have an active self-care practice, you are actively meeting yourself at that level more times than not. And so the things that would normally stress you out don't come in at the level that they normally would. We're able to take in what's happening, process it, and change our response to it because we're already giving ourselves space and these healthy practices to keep ourselves in a healthy space. Now, I say that I want you to know we all experience anxiety from time to time. I want you to think about how much anxiety is caused by not doing something that you say you're supposed to do, or when you're late, or when things are not working out for you. We all experience that, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that if you have this self-care practice, that all of the things that drive people crazy are not going to come in. They will. It's that you have a different connection to it. If you engage in practices that help you, you work to eliminate the stress response. We all know what our stresses are, or we kind of know what our stressors are. We understand how they impact us, even if it's only on a surface level. And we have to find great tools to address them. And a lot of people say coping strategies, but again, remember that our coping strategies are sometimes not the healthiest, but we feel that they are our safest. And when we talk about self-care, we're talking about true coping tools, not strategies, the tools that change the way we respond. So let's be clear. Self-care has nothing to do with buying things. It doesn't always mean alone time. Connection is highly important. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. If you feel lonely, the care factor would not be to add more loneliness. It would be the opposite. You can't always avoid doing what is necessary or a core problem in favor of a distraction and call it self-care, right? That's so important to understand. True self-care can only be found through self-awareness and self-acceptance. There are a couple more things that I need you to be aware of before we break down the 7 areas of self-care. And those are, it's extremely important to know that you cannot self-care your way out of trauma or conflict or emotional dysregulation. If your basic needs are not being met, no matter what they are, in that space of the five masters, you will not be able to journal or breath work your way out of those feelings. Those are tools and strategies that help you move through the work, but they are not in substitute of the work themselves. The journaling allows us to get down to the facts of the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem. It is something that I highly recommend. It's something that many use to get to the basis of the work. But again, it isn't the only space. If that's all you use, you're going to miss the mark and fall flat. It's like putting a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. It's not enough coverage, right? You have to do the work. Self-care is the support system, not the method out. You must process. Because I've said it before, the only way through something is through it. You can't go around it or under it or over it. The way to fulfill you is through your most inner core and your experiences. Self-care doesn't always mean slowing down or relaxing. That's important too. That's a huge misnomer. Sometimes it's running. Sometimes it's dancing or kickboxing or climbing. It can and should be whatever helps you rejuvenate. So now that we know what it isn't and what it is, let's talk about the 7 areas of self-care and how you can embrace that in order to really serve the 5 masters of your life and yourself in your overall well-being and most authentic nature. So important. And as we move through these 7 areas of care, I'm going to give you some examples that maybe you've heard of, but you didn't realize were actual self-care that you're actually already doing. This is very important because a lot of people don't realize that they're already doing these things, but they don't realize that they have some form of natural self-care in motion. And I want you to witness that. It's very important, right? Because I don't want you to feel like, oh, I've been doing everything wrong and now I have to start all over. No, you're doing some things to naturally care for yourself. Every human does it, but it can be a space where we need to elevate it a bit in order to feel our best. So those 7 areas of self-care are emotional self-care, physical self-care, mental self-care, social self-care, spiritual self-care, practical self-care, and professional self-care. You may have noticed that 5 of our masters are included as the baseline to the self-care methods, right? Emotional, physical, mental, and then our practical and professional falls into that financial piece. Let's take a moment to think about what would happen if you had a self-care practice that was rooted in true care, right? Across the board, not just these small little pieces, but across the board. You would, in fact, give yourself a space to embrace your humanness, the fallible nature within all of us. All of us are fallible. We're not perfect by any nature, by any form. You'd be able to build a higher self-esteem and a level of true grounded confidence that is unshakable. You would likely see a reduced form of anxiety in your life, or your stress levels would go down. And I believe you will see a spike in overall happiness. We even have research that shows a solid self-care practice helps improve chronic illnesses. It helps us heal ourselves from the inside out through all of the 5 areas of our lives. It improves our relationships and it helps prevent future disease. So let's look at those levels, those breakdowns of our self-care. And we're going to start with emotional self-care. Now, this is the ability to regulate your emotions and cope with difficult feelings. This is the most important part as they arise. Your ability to regulate your emotions and cope in the moment as it comes. That's why emotional self-care, the actions we take to connect with our emotions and process them in a healthy way, is so damn important. While everyone can benefit from investing time and attention in this critical area of self-care, those that really receive the highest benefit of it are those that have a difficult time controlling their emotions, or are easily impacted by others' negative moods or feelings, or those that struggle to cope with their feelings, especially the negative ones of shame or guilt, embarrassment, jealousy, anger, or our feelings of low self-esteem or unworthiness. By engaging in emotional self-care and learning to give yourself grace and space, right? Both important. You develop healthy coping skills that vastly, and I mean vastly, increase that sense of well-being. So let me give you a few examples. Again, we're just hitting the baseline of a few things in each of these categories. And the reason why we're not going super deep is you have to figure out what works for you, right? So these are just a few examples. So examples of emotional self-care is therapy or life coaching. Getting to the root of why you feel the way that you do. Why do you have pain? Why do you have emotional dysregulation? What is it that you need? The second is journaling. Again, it has to be done in conjunction with getting to the root. It is a tool, not necessarily always the method, unless you are skilled at being able to identify the root and so forth. 3 would be utilizing affirmations or mantras. 4 will be meditation. And let me tell you, you're going to hear me say meditation through all of these. And again, we're not talking about necessarily having to sit quiet and turning off the mind. We're talking about working with ourselves to break the unhealthy habits and give ourselves space, grace, and a space of grounded calm. And the last one would be practicing gratitude. The best way to start tending to your emotional health is to first pay attention to your thoughts and the way you speak to yourself. Notice if you're engaging in that negative self-talk, and when we notice, we can actually take the first step into breaking that habit. I often make people write down their negatives for 5 to 7 days. It's because we begin to see a pattern, and it's shocking how unhealthy that inner voice is. It's from there that the self-care practice can be formed, because we replace those thoughts. We get them out through journaling, or we use that mantra to answer the inner voice, meditation to slow the thoughts, and gratitude to remember what's working in our life. So if we don't know something, we can't make a change into it. So we have to know what's happening within. Emotional self-care is number 1. It's first on the list. Now let's move to physical self-care. Of course, this seems very self-explanatory, and it's probably what many of us actually think of when we hear the word self-care. This type of self-care really refers to any activity that you deliberately engage in that's going to enhance your well-being. Again, we think of the massages, the bubble baths, all the things. And while caring for yourself physically is beneficial to anyone, right? All of us, the way you choose to engage really should depend on your lifestyle. So if a bubble bath doesn't make you feel comfortable, that's the last thing you should be doing. But say you sit in an office chair all day, taking a dog for a walk at the end of the day would be a great form of self-care. Or if you're on your feet all day, you could opt for restorative yoga instead. Your physical self-care also could include your diet, and it should include your diet. If you don't have a healthy relationship with food, you have to increase your care around this physical need too. Of course, you probably know a lot of these examples, and you probably are doing some of them, but let me give you a few extras that you may not actually zone into and call physical self-care. So of course, being active, we all know that. So that's going for the bike ride, going for a walk, a run, taking a fitness class, yoga, all the things, right? Anything that physically moves the body. Meditation, right? I told you you're going to hear me say that. This is actually a form of self-care that is physical too. While we talk about getting still, understand that when we meditate, we're using our breath, which is our natural form, our natural rhythm of being able to reset the body. And this is physical care too. There's dancing to your favorite song, increasing your sleep quality, changing your diet, stretching, basic health practices like brushing your teeth or flossing, great skin care. Physical care can actually be much simpler than we've made it to be. In fact, you may have just realized in many ways you're already giving yourself grounded self-care, like I said before. Simply give some thought to what type of physical activity makes you feel calm, balanced, and happy, and then schedule a regular time to do them. Now let's move to mental self-care. Mental self-care encompasses everything you do specifically to stimulate your mind and to cultivate a healthy psyche. I teach mindfulness because it allows us to stay present in the moment while creating the healthy balance in the mind. We don't necessarily have to try to reach this mental state of mental nirvana, right? I don't want that. What I really want you to do is have a true understanding and creating a loving relationship with your mind, your thoughts, and how you process the world around you. That is mental self-care. So here's some examples. Therapy, right? Big one. A lot of people don't want to do it because they're afraid of what they're going to find. But if you are not in a space where you feel mentally strong or mentally healthy, this is the path of least resistance to be able to help yourself. You can also listen to a podcast like you're doing now. Try a new hobby. Meditation. There it is again. Going to a museum or something mentally stimulating to you. Picking up a new hobby. Even reading and writing, such as poetry or journaling or doing the stream of consciousness without judgment kind of automatic writing. Beyond stimulating activities, mental self-care also encompasses learning how to manage your thoughts. Remember in the very beginning, I said step 1 is getting very clear about what's happening in your mindset. Mental self-care is also setting clear boundaries with friends and family or coworkers or work itself, and recognizing when you need to reach out for help, when you need to be supported. Ultimately, mental self-care is about stimulating, nurturing, and listening to that beautiful brain of yours, right? Let's talk about social self-care. This is a piece of self-care that so many people miss. It is so imperative, so necessary, and it ranks right up there with mental and emotional support. We humans are social beings. You've heard me say it a million times, and I will continue to say it a million more times. We are wired for connection, which means we are required to have regular connection with other people to thrive. Yes, even you introverts out there need this, right? This is why prioritizing social self-care or activities that nurture your relationships with others is critical. I didn't say essential. I didn't say necessary. I said critical, because that's how important it is. When you feel lonely, you struggle. The problem is oftentimes when our life gets really, really hectic or overwhelming, the exact time that we need connection with others is the time that we tend to cancel our plans, we withdraw, and we pull the covers over our heads. We call it depression, and often it's all about our connection. Not saying that there's not times that we're depressed. What I'm saying is when we are lacking with connection, we often feel the depression set in. While, of course, we all need just to say no sometimes, it's also important that we take time for social engagement. We have to remember that socializing with others, even when we are busy, is not a privilege. It is a necessity. Okay? So please, if you're not making this a part of your daily life or in your regular rotation of your week, you must step this up. Some examples would be scheduling a regular phone call with someone that you are close to, or hosting a night with your friends, or going on a date with your significant other. Cuddling with an animal is important. Volunteering, group exercise classes is a huge way to connect. One of the best places to go and find calm, to be mentally well within self-care, physically and emotionally, and even engage, is yoga. Guess where another place would be? Group meditation. There it is again. Growing a community or joining a community with like interests also helps us. While social self-care often means spending time with other people, it can also mean the opposite. Give some thought to which relationships are no longer serving you in your life. If there's someone you find that is draining you, would it be better to allow yourself some space? Your relationship should uplift you and fulfill you, not deflate and drain you. So what do you need in your social self-care? If we have relationships that are taking up all of our time, that also means it's closing the door on those that could actually benefit us. So I want you to think about that. What do you need? What do you want? How are you going to get there? Now, number 5 on our self-care list in these areas is spiritual self-care. Now, before you click pause, I want you to realize that the name should not fool you. This form of self-care applies to everyone, regardless of your belief system or lack thereof, or your religious beliefs. Spiritual self-care encompasses any activity you engage in that you connect with and nurture your soul with. This practice is fundamentally about connecting with your inner spirit. Remember, I said, if you want to elevate your soul, you actually have to engage with the soul, with the spirit. For some, this may include activities that honor a belief in a higher power, whether that's God or the universe or whatever guides you. For others, it's about connecting with nature and Mother Earth. Whatever that looks like for you, you have to decide. And then you honor it and put practices in its place to really use it to your greatest benefit. Spiritual self-care is a helpful tool for everyone, especially if you're looking to feel more grounded in your day-to-day life. It can provide comfort when you're dealing with loss or grief or medical or financial insecurities or uncertainty. It really helps us when we dive into negative emotions or our mindset is off. In any of our life's stressful curveballs, this part of our self-care can really help us move through in a way that holds us in a grounded and healthy space. Some examples would be spending time in nature, engaging in prayer or attending a worship ceremony or service, doing yoga, volunteering for a cause you care about, giving to others, even creating a vision board or doing something that lights you up and inspires you. Meditation, right? Here it is. And any healthy form of mental, physical, emotional, or physical care that honors the soul. While everybody's spiritual self-care is unique to them, there are a few things that you can do to set yourself up for success. So if you are incorporating a daily spiritual practice into your routine, such as meditation, designate a peaceful and quiet area of your home so that you have a space that is just yours and it's a space of peace. Try to avoid social media first thing in the morning and even use some soul-affirming mantras to help you ease into a very successful and healthy day. Let's move now to practical self-care. We are coming to an end of these certain self-care areas, but this is an action that you take to fulfill your core needs and reduce stress that can be slotted in any of these categories. So this covers your everyday activity, and think about how you feel when you do these small activities. So think about what it feels like when you have a clean home or you stick to a workout routine. These are forms of self-care that admittedly are less exciting to people, right? But they cannot be underestimated because they make a huge impact on our overall well-being, and they help us create a sense of calm and control in our busy lives. Some examples of practical self-care activities are organizing the elements of your life, right? Like putting into place a calendar that really helps you stay on top of things, tidying your living space, working with a financial advisor. That's a great practical self-care activity. Again, meditation, meal prepping, and even planning. You can use these practical self-care practices in a way that creates sustainable, healthy habits, right? Because we're doing them repetitively, which becomes the habit. A couple more just to toss out would be limiting your social media use or limiting phone usage or committing to a better sleep schedule, or regularly decluttering the space in which you live. Now let's move to our last one, which is professional self-care. A lot of people don't even think about the fact that they need to put self-care around their work environment. This is where the majority of us spend the largest amount of time during our day, and yet we don't focus on these self-care activities when it comes to work. So if you're employed, whether you are the owner of that business or you are an employee, it's essential to make time for professional self-care. These are the activities and the actions that create fulfilling, balanced careers. Even if you love your job and don't find it particularly stressful, incorporating these things are going to help you prevent burnout and keep you inspired. It's things like setting a calendar reminder to take a lunch break. A lot of us don't do that. It's spending time with coworkers. It's setting your phone to do not disturb at the end of your workday and setting a limitation on checking emails or even responding. It's taking courses, attending conferences, or working with a mentor to develop your skills and support your desired career path. It's even taking a mental health day or a sick day when you need it. Boundary setting at work can be daunting, but it is so critical for you. Once you achieve a healthier work-life balance, you're going to find that it's easier to focus on the other areas of self-care and the masters of your life. Again, we spend the majority of our time in our work environment, and so we must focus on that area too. Now, after hearing all of these things, you may be overwhelmed. But please remember, as I said in the beginning, we don't necessarily always focus on all of these areas at once. So pick one area that most stood out to you and start so small, so minute. What's working in your life and what isn't? Your job is to lean into what isn't working by doing a bit of self-exploration, asking those questions of yourself, and then getting into motion. Self-care is about intentional focus that helps create sustainable, healthy, happier lifestyles. I want you to think about, if I do one small thing, what will change? If what you've been doing, the forms of fake self-care that haven't been working, isn't something that now sounds sustainable and even worth it, ask yourself what is. And when you know, take the time to lean into it. You do deserve to feel your best, and doing so is an essential step into getting your life together. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you're seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, you can follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and now Clapper. You can also visit my show notes, my blog, and my website at getyourlifetogethergirl.com. While you're there, take a look around. You can find your way into booking a one-on-one session with me, having some Get Your Life Together Girl merch, or even reading some information that will help you thrive. Thank you once again for being a valuable member of this community. As always, be kind to yourself and others.